religion claims that they alone are the only true religion. Whether it's Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, you name it, each religion has a revelation and a revelation narrative that they claim is the only true source. However, there's a pattern in all of these claims that is suspect, especially given that each revelation is different. Some religions permit polygamy, while others mandate monogamy. Some religions prohibit certain foods, and others say you can eat whatever you want. Would God really give conflicting messages to different people? Because all religions are different in their messages, we know that not more than one religion can be true. But how can we prove any of them false? Fortunately, by the end of this video, you will be able to stake your claim in the truth. There's a common pattern across all religions. See if you can catch it. Saul is walking on the road to Damascus when all of a sudden he has a vision where he sees Jesus who gives him revelation. Saul changes his name to Paul and starts Christianity. Muhammad is meditating in the cave of Hira when he has a vision of the angel Jibril reciting revelation from Allah. Muhammad continues to experience revelation, starts preaching monotheism, and Islam is born. Siddhartha Gautama is sitting under the Bodhi tree, where he attains enlightenment and has revelation, where he understands the nature of suffering. He becomes the Buddha and starts spreading his teachings. Joseph Smith receives revelation, and an angel guides him to golden plates, where he translates the Book of Mormon, thereby starting Mormonism. Did you catch the pattern? All of these religions started from one man who receives divine revelation. Modern cults start the same way. One or two people experience revelation and then persuade many others to follow. The credibility of all of these religions rests on the founders of these religions. There's no reason for us to believe it than to not believe it. The only evidence is the word of the founders. However, there is one religion that does not follow this pattern, and that religion is Judaism. In the desert, 600,000 men and their wives, plus their children and the elderly, totaling approximately 2 to 3 million people, stood at the foot of a mountain called Sinai, where they received divine revelation. Every single person heard God speak. So instead of one person receiving revelation, an entire nation experienced revelation. But remember, we're still trying to figure out which religion is plausible, if any of them. So therefore, let's assume that every religion is a lie. This is easy to disprove all the other religions. We can just say that the founders of all the other religions were lying. There's only one person, he claims that he received revelation. We can just say that, okay, he's lying. However, it gets a little bit tougher with Judaism because there's so many people. Nevertheless, we're going to try to come up with a scenario where this lie proliferated. At some point, somebody must have told a lie. And this lie could have taken three forms that we will call present theory, past theory, and future theory. Now in present theory, a charismatic leader comes up to you and says, you just now heard God speak. You just now heard God say, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other God before me. I hand you the Torah and you accept it. In past theory, a man comes up to you and says, you didn't hear God speak, but your ancestors heard God speak. And here is the Torah about the event. In future theory, just for completeness, the man comes up to you and says, you didn't hear God speak, your ancestors didn't hear God speak, but someday your descendants will hear God speak. Let's delve into future theory first because it's probably the most ridiculous. Remember, future theory is when a guy comes up to you and says, you heard nothing, your ancestors heard nothing, but someday your descendants will hear God speak saying, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. Here's the advanced copy, and then hands you the Torah, and you accept it. Now it's important to realize that unless they're the child of a convert, all Jews have an Orthodox ancestor. Thus, there's a link from all Jews to an Orthodox ancestor who believed with all his or her heart and soul that the event at Mount Sinai indeed happened. Now let's imagine how this chain would proceed in future theory. What would you tell your kids? You'd likely say, I didn't hear anything, my ancestors didn't hear anything, but someday you or your descendants will hear God speak at Mount Sinai. And then what will your kids tell their kids? They'll probably say the same thing. I didn't hear anything, my ancestors haven't heard anything, but someday God will speak to you or your descendants at Mount Sinai. So thus, this would just keep going from generation to generation. The problem is that this chain does not exist. The chain that does exist is a chain of people claiming that their ancestors heard God speak at Mount Sinai. Thus, this future theory doesn't work. Many secular scholars, however, prefer past theory. In past theory, a man comes up to you and says, you did not hear God speak, but your ancestors heard God speak, saying, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. He then hands you the Torah with basically that, and you accept it. Now imagine you're at Sinai and you actually hear God speak. You thus become an Orthodox Jew. You just heard God speak, therefore you're going to follow all of his laws. And then you have children and you raise up your children with those laws, and the children ask you, why are we following all these crazy laws? Well, what do you say to your children? You say, I heard God speak. And so the children keep following the laws, and what do they tell their children? My mom heard God speak. And what did they tell their children? My grandma heard God speak. Your grandchildren then have children, and they thus explain that their great-grandparents heard God speak. And it just keeps going on and on and on for generations. Now let's assume that the entire thing is a lie, because that's what we're supposed to do. The man comes up to you and says, you didn't hear God speak? Your ancestors heard God speak. You've never heard of this before. The first thing that you're going to do is probably ask your mom or your grandma if they've ever heard of such a thing. They say no. Would you really believe this? What you're probably going to do is go up to the man and say, I've never heard of what you're talking about. My parents and grandparents have never heard of what you're talking about. I don't think I'm going to accept what you say about this. Now here's where secular scholars actually think Judaism started. The man then replies to you and says, oh yeah, no, you're not supposed to have heard of this thing. Your mother and your grandmother aren't supposed to know about this either. Because what actually happened was, your ancestors did indeed hear God speak, but then this disaster, insert earthquake, war, mass assimilation, everybody was Orthodox Jews, but then this disaster wiped them all out. But fear not, I am here to give you back your tradition, your heritage, the Torah. Now, that's how Judaism could have started, right? But here's the problem with that. Jews give credit where credit is due. So what I mean by this is that if you go up and ask any non-Jew studying Jewish mythology, and you ask him, who went up to the mountain and brought the Torah down? He'd likely say Moses. Who led the Israelites into Israel? Joshua. Who brought the Jews back into the land of Israel after the Babylonian exile and started the Second Temple period? They'd say Ezra. Who codified the Mishnah? They'd say Judah the Prince. There are meticulous tabs on every single person who has made a great contribution to Jewish history. But we don't know the name of this individual who brought back the long-lost tradition. Similarly, we don't even know of this disaster. We know of the Babylonian and the Syrian exile, but we don't even know about this disaster that wiped all of the Orthodox Jews off the planet? Thus, it seems highly improbable that this past theory is a valid explanation. If you still remain unconvinced, please stick around for the last point. It defeats all others. But let's move on to present theory. In present theory, a man tells you, you just now heard God speak. You just now heard God say, I'm the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. He then hands you the Torah. Now let's take a slight detour to talk about Marshall Applewhite and the Heaven's Gate cult. Marshall Applewhite convinced his followers that the arrival of the Hale-Bopp comet and the spaceship trailing it presented their final opportunity to evacuate Earth before it was recycled or destroyed.
Everything of the planet is about to be recycled because it needs to be refurbished.
To reach the next level of existence, members of the group were instructed to ingest a lethal dose of phenobarbital, drink it with vodka, and then place plastic bags over their heads. 39 did exactly that, took the lethal dose, tied the trash bag around their head, laid down, and died.
You can follow us, but you cannot stay here and follow us. You would have to follow quickly by also leaving this world before the conclusion of our leaving this atmosphere in preparation for its recycling.
Marshall Applewhite then followed suit. Now it's important to recognize that none of Applewhite's theories came true. For example, the Earth is still here, life still exists, so we can assume that Applewhite was telling lies, or he was very much disillusioned. But here's where things get interesting. Researchers analyzed the members of the Heaven's Gate cult to see who would really fall for this. What they found were highly educated people. Every one of them had an undergraduate degree, and many had advanced degrees like masters, JDs, MDs. Further, none had psychological counseling before the cult, and family members said that the people were normal before joining the cult. So these people were smart, psychologically stable people, and yet they fell for Marshall Applewhite's lies. So what can we draw from this? We can establish a first clause. People are gullible. They will believe anything, even if it asks them to act self-destructively. But then we can even further this clause to say, as long as the lie cannot be checked, people are gullible. They will believe anything, even something that asks them to act self-destructively. But as long as the lie cannot be checked, why didn't Applewhite say, oh, the spaceship that dropped your mother off here has come to rescue you? Well, because you can easily check that. You could go and ask your mom, hey mom, did a spaceship ever drop you off here? Your mom would likely say, no son, I think you're in a cult. Similarly, we cannot check any of the other religions' founding statements. They all came from a single individual. It is uncheckable. Now let's apply this to the event at Mount Sinai. Moses comes down from the mountain and says, "You just now heard God speak. You just now heard God say, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me." Now, it's hard to convince a group of people that they just now heard God speak. Like, it's not like these people had never seen a thunderstorm before. They were slaves in Egypt. They definitely experienced the outdoor elements. This is some pretty crazy persuasion that Moses would have to do to convince an entire nation that they just heard God speak. But here's the final point that I want you to stick around for, because it destroys literally everything. Many people still come up with many scenarios, like, oh, maybe it's a national drug trip, or maybe it was a volcano and then the story slowly evolved to say that God spoke on Mount Sinai. Please listen to this final argument. It's the most compelling in my opinion. Science relies on observation and experimentation to make predictions about the natural world. Thus, the backbone of the scientific method is that anything natural will happen more than once. Now, imagine that I have a solid golden pen. You ask me, yo, where did you get that pen? I say, I transformed it. It used to be a blue plastic pen, but I transformed it, and now it's a solid golden pen. Then I hand you the formula. You then take this formula and you give it to 100 scientists and tell them to recreate what I just did. After a month, you go back, ask all the scientists, none of them were able to replicate. Now, what are you going to conclude, since none of them could replicate it? You're going to conclude that I was probably lying about transforming the blue plastic pen into the solid golden pen. Why do you make that conclusion? Because what I said had happened did not happen again under the same conditions after many trials. Something natural does happen after many trials and under the same conditions. Thus, what I said must have been a lie. And you're right. Science says that anything natural will happen more than once. History says the same thing, only in just 3 words. History repeats itself. Now, obviously not in the gruesome detail, but thematically, with themes, history does tend to repeat itself. The same causes lead to economic depressions, same with wars, the French Revolution, Napoleon, it doesn't matter. These themes do repeat themselves in history. Similarly, we can reproduce any religion given 25 themes. For example, a man achieves great wisdom and then comes down and heals people. Man becomes God incarnate, and we could go on. But there is only one religion that does not conform to any of these themes, and that religion is Judaism. God speaking to a large group of people has only been recorded once in all of human history. So let's say the Jews had a national drug trip. You're making this claim. So I ask you, is a national drug trip a natural event? You wanting to defend your claim say, yeah, sure, it's a natural event. I then ask you, do natural events happen more than once? You say, yeah, natural events happen more than once. Let me ask you a third question. Has it ever happened again? You say, no. Let's go to the evolving mythology. Is it natural for a mythology to evolve where a group of people heard God speak? So yeah, sure, it's natural for that to happen. Okay, do natural events happen more than once? You say yes. Did that ever happen again? No. Then that's not natural. With this analysis, any theory falls apart. Let's move into statistics. Please keep listening. Let's say somebody claims that the event is natural, but it's so extremely unlikely that it has only happened once in the last 4,000 years, but it could really happen any second. If the odds of an event taking place naturally are 1 in, let's say, 1,000,000, then what are the odds of the event taking place unnaturally? That would be 999,999 out of 1,000,000. If the odds of an event happening naturally are 1 in trillions or even millions, it would be crazy to believe that the event happened naturally. If it's outrageously unlikely that a natural event led to the Jews hearing God speak at Mount Sinai, then it must be outrageously likely that it was not a natural event, but rather a supernatural event, a miracle that created this mythology. If you wanted to argue that it really was the 1 in trillion chance that started Judaism, betting on the 0.0000001% natural against the 99.9999999% supernatural, then you are a greater believer than me. Any rational person would stake their claim in the supernatural in this scenario. If you've stuck around this far, thank you for hanging in there. I could have explained how in history, national experiential traditions have never been proven false, but I found these arguments by Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman to be by far the most compelling. The basis was that we have to understand how this tradition started, what was the lie that started it all? And even after dismantling present theory, past theory, and future theory, we can come to a final conclusion that wipes out all theories that the event was supernatural. I hope you join me in this rational understanding as we begin to uncover the Noahide Code, which is God's plan for all non-Jews. Subscribe to stay tuned for more. If you've made it this far, I sincerely thank you for watching.